Subscribe to the Business Insider, and I got to say they have really, really good gig gig worker articles, Uber articles, Lyft articles. This one, Uber and Lyft have long said they pay drivers fairly, but they haven't shared all the data that could prove it, right? So the one thing is, like, you can go out like Darrow or Logan and make these big, bold statements in the news, through your press releases on Twitter, but can they actually back it up with data and prove what they say? Very often they can't. So, great article. Let me read it to you. Uber and Lyft are trying to lure drivers back on the road with the promise of high earnings, but both have struggled to back up past claims about earnings, leaving many drivers skeptical. And that's precisely that word skeptical, right? When you're skeptical over and over again, you walk away. Experts told Insider Uber and Lyft's refusal to share pay data is largely to blame, right? They don't want the real numbers to come out, ladies and gentlemen, right? So in 2014, as Uber was on its way to becoming the world's most valuable startup, it boasted that drivers in New York City were working at least 40 hours per week and earned a medallion income of more than $90,000 per year, while San Francisco drivers earned more than $74,000 a year. For drivers working 52 weeks per year, that would average out to more than $44 and $35 per hour, respectively. At the time, Uber's reputation was untainted by the litany of scandals that would eventually roil the company, including alleged efforts to circumvent regulators, claims of rampant sexual harassment and assault impacting drivers and corporate employees, and years of unprofitability. News media initially took Uber's claims about driver pay at face value. Uber's remarkable growth could end the era of poorly paid cab drivers, read a 2014 headline from the Washington Post. Insider first reported Uber's claims in a similarly unskeptical fashion, but those claims soon began to fall apart, with drivers telling Insider they were actually making between $5 and $20 an hour. So, big, bold statements not backed up by data. The Federal Trade Commission eventually accused Uber of misleading drivers by exaggerating their earnings potential by as much as 50%, alleging the median income was just $61,000, $29 per hour in New York, and $53,000, $25 per hour in San Francisco. And why do Travis and Dara keep on telling the lies, right? Do they think that enough lies will make it right one day? Sorry, Dara. Sorry, Travis. Uber agreed to pay $20 million and not make false or misleading claims about driver pay in order to settle the charges the FTC announced in 2017. So they paid a hefty fine. Since then, Uber and Lyft have both been dogged by the question of how much they pay drivers. And despite the efforts of independent researchers, regulators, and reporters, the answer has remained elusive. That's because Uber and Lyft rarely share detailed data about driver earnings, and when they do, it's usually presented in ways that overestimate what drivers are actually pocketing, according to some researchers who spoke to Insider. As the companies try to get wary drivers back on the road, good luck. Uber told Insider drivers median earnings are nearly $42 per hour in San Diego and Austin, and more than $35 in other major cities. I'm laughing. Lyft co-founder and president John Zimmer said last month drivers in the company's top 25 markets are making $30 an hour. I'm laughing. Lyft did not respond to multiple requests for comment on this story. Obviously not. Uber provided median earnings for 6 cities. We believe this is the best and most straightforward way to communicate earnings on Uber, which vary by when, how, and where drivers choose to drive. To suggest that figures we have provided aren't accurate is both unfounded and unfair, Uber spokesman Kyla Whaling told Insider. Kayla, let me give you some news here, sweetie Kayla. You are presenting the very best scenario of maybe a handful of drivers, and you think you're going to BS the media and BS the rest of the drivers. No, there's a few that maybe really earn top dollars because they know exactly when and where to drive and how to milk the system. So you're going by those figures. You are not being honest about the true earnings, and that is a fact, right? So it's time they start speaking the truth, including Kayla. But researchers told Insider it's the numbers Uber and Lyft haven't provided that make it difficult to verify what drivers actually make. If Uber is touting a certain hourly pay, they need to make clear what it's based on. James Parrott, Director of Economic and Fiscal Policies at the New School Center for New York City Affairs, told Insider. If the data really would show that the drivers are earning a pretty decent pay per hour, you would think that they would make that data available because it would certainly help their case, their pitch to drivers to come back to the platform. Correct, he's 100% right. Pay raise or temporary pandemic surge. From a strictly economic perspective, it makes sense that hourly earnings would go up during a driver shortage. Michael Reich, an economics professor at the University of California, Berkeley's Institute for Research, told Insider. Drivers get more trips per hour, there's less waiting time. Uber and Lyft don't pay drivers for the time they spend waiting for the companies to find them a ride, or 33% of the hours that drivers are active on the platform before the pandemic, according to Reich's research. That waiting time skyrocketed when the pandemic hit, as drivers competed for fewer passengers, and has likely dropped again as passengers return. In other words, a driver in Austin making $42 per hour by Uber's calculation may just be benefiting from less unpaid time between rides. But Uber explicitly said these higher earnings will likely be temporary and will drop again if and when more drivers return. The bigger question is whether the companies are paying drivers more per trip. They're not giving the answer, and there's really no way to come up with the independent data to let us know. Even though Uber and Lyft have been charging passengers more, the Washington Post reported drivers don't necessarily get a larger cut. That's because they're paid based on the time and distance of the trip, not what the customer pays. Uber spokesman Matt Wing told the Post Uber's cut of each fare has stayed the same, but CEO Dara Khosrowshahi argued that decoupling driver pay from fares actually led to drivers taking home a larger share. BS, Dara, implying Uber took less. Industry blogger Harry Campbell called Uber's response a contradiction that highlighted the company's lack of transparency about pay rates. Good for you, Harry. Lyft also told the Post its cut has stayed the same. It's very hard to take what the companies say at face value. Khosrowshahi's claim that the drivers are getting more of the pie follows years of Uber and Lyft's cutting rates as they experimented with different pay structures. Uber dropped rates from $2.15 to $1.75 per mile in 2017, and in 2019 from 80 cents to 60 cents per mile for California drivers. Per mile rates vary by location. Lyft followed with rate cuts of its own and recently cut drivers' rates. With the Rideshare guy reporting a Boston driver got their rates cut to as low as 66 cents per mile. When making these cuts, Uber and Lyft have often claimed other changes in their pay structures offset drivers' losses. Because of the multiple levers the company can pull when adjusting pay, researchers need data beyond per mile or per minute rates or cherry-picked median earnings. Exactly, cherry-picked median earnings. That's what I said. Last year, Reich and Parrott hoped to get that data when conducting a study on behalf of the city of Seattle to determine whether Uber and Lyft were paying drivers the minimum wage. Both researchers told Insider that for such a study, they'd at a minimum want a company data showing how long drivers logged onto the apps, their total earnings, how many miles they drove to determine drivers' vehicle expenses, and what percentage of each fare the companies and drivers are pocketing. But when Seattle asked the companies for that and other data, Lyft refused, and Uber provided only limited summary data. Reich and Parrott had to rely on their own survey of 6,500 drivers and concluded they made $9.63 per hour. So Dara's talking shit. Logan's talking shit. Meanwhile, the companies gave the data to Louis Hyman, a Cornell University researcher who concluded in a separate study that drivers made $23 $25 per hour after expenses. Uber had quietly paid Cornell $120,000 for that work. This is how these guys work, ladies and gentlemen. We'll pay you 120 grand, publish false data. Parrott called Hyman's study a sleight of hand that used Uber and Lyft's preferred methodology of not counting the time drivers spend waiting and estimating vehicle costs at 30 cents per mile, even though the IRS estimates such costs at 57.5 cents per mile. Hyman declined to comment. It's very hard to take what the companies say at face value, given that they have been very insistent all along that drivers only get paid when they have a passenger in the car or on their way to pick up a passenger. Every labor economist I know who looks at this says that the drivers should be paid for their working time. Uber and Lyft have argued they shouldn't have to pay for waiting time because drivers could have multiple company apps on in those times. Parrott said agreements with local regulators like the minimum pay law that went into effect in New York City in 2009 could allow companies to avoid this. Regulators really need to know. Ultimately, regulators are the only ones with the ability to force Uber and Lyft to hand over driver pay data. But they are also hamstrung by the company's decision to classify drivers as contractors. Unlike contractors, if an employee claims they are being underpaid, labor regulators can demand data from the employer about that employee, and in some cases, all employees. Regulators really need to know what the implications are, he said, not just for a driver pay, but also for congestion in the cities. I wish the regulatory agencies would demand that they be given the data, and so far they don't have a way to compel the data, and that's the problem. It's a big problem, ladies and gentlemen. Now, I do want to give my friends at Legal Rideshare, Brian Greening, a huge shout out. The bottom line is you might have already reached out to a law company that's really not representing you well. Contact Legal Rideshare. They can take over the case, and they'll also make sure that you have your ducks in the row, right? If you get into an accident, you got to make sure you follow the protocol. So I highly suggest you reach out to these guys if you do get into an accident. He's a phenomenal guy. Spoken to him numerous times. He cares about the drivers, and he gets you the maximum monies. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for listening to that article. Please feel free to comment. Please give your feedback. It's the feedback really that verifies, justifies these articles, and so we don't just swallow what these companies are spoon feeding us. I appreciate you guys. Please subscribe, like the video, stay safe out there, and have a great day. God bless.